Take Review, where 4 college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Sopchockchai Bankard, and I'm here with a musicologist and a silver dagger. First, the world loves him. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Write, send chocolate, don't die. I'm good, Jen, and I'm so glad this movie gave me a new motto for my class and how students can get ahead in it.
Amazing. Words to live by, right? And he's meeting me January 1st at the Augusta train station. How are you doing, Antonio?
Don't sing love songs, you'll wake my mother. She's sleeping here, right by my side. I'm doing great, Jen. I'm so excited to be here.
I didn't realize the ghost of Joan Baez joined us, but this is amazing. So, dear listeners, those were all references to the film we are here to review today, Oliver Hermanus's The History of Sound, an adaptation of the short story by Ben Shattuck, who also wrote the screenplay for the film. Oliver Hermanus previously directed the 2022 film Living, starring Bill Nighy, which from what I remember, was a long take review favorite.
Yeah, I liked it.
We all like that movie. And that was also an adaptation of the 1952 Kurosawa movie. The History of Sound, the book, which, Greg, be proud of us, we've all read.
I know. I'm so excited. Although I'm the least prepared because I read it last summer, but you'll carry me through my dream coming true of a book club episode.
The book is a collection of 12 interconnected stories set in New England, exploring how the past is often misunderstood. In the collection, each of the stories are paired with the secondary story revealing something about the first. You really got to read it to believe it, folks. It's very cool. Or the connection might bring a new perspective or context. The History of Sound, the movie, is an adaptation of the first and last stories in the collection. So if you've read the whole book and you hear us talking about it and you're like, what about the rest of the book? That's by design. It's so the 2 stories are The History of Sound and Origin Stories. They kind of bookend the anthology. The film stars Paul Mescal, long take review favorite, as Lionel, a singer from rural Kentucky who ends up studying at the Boston Conservatory, where in 1917 meets a musicologist named David, played by Josh O'Connor, another favorite. So yes, all our favorites are in this movie. David sings a folk song Lionel's father used to sing, and the connection, both personally and professionally, grows from there. Wow, great. Well done, Antonio. Antonio wrote the copy for here. I'm like, oh, that's a great... You should be on the marketing team for this movie, because they're not doing this. If you're listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen the film. It is a smaller film, so our expectation is that maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. But with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. So hopefully listen in, even if you have no idea what we're talking about right now, listen into the first 30 minutes or so, 20 to 30 minutes, and that will give you a good indicator if this is something you want to check out. But first, Greg, if listeners think they admire us after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Well, instead of waiting for us to finally release on Wax Cylinder, instead you can follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. Finally, you can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod.
Thanks, Greg. So, as always, we'll start with the short take. What was everyone's general reaction to The History of Sound? Antonio, you were the one who called this to order and said, I would like to not only be on this episode, but make the outline for it. So why don't you get us started?
First of all, thank you to Greg for directing us to the short story collection in the first place. I took it on vacation and I absolutely loved it. And I was really, it just whet my appetite for the film. But I loved the book so much that I was worried I wasn't going to love the film as much. But I thought it lived up to its excellent source material. Like its central character, the film was patient and elegant and flawed. But I think it's a movie that had the courage to stay true to its central perspective and to Lionel's complicated interiority, which is a difficult task to pull off effectively in cinema. It just worked for me. As soon as I finished the movie, I went home and I reread both short stories and was delighted to discover that, like 2 of Shattuck's paired stories, the works reinforced one another. It's not a typical romance, and Mescal's Lionel is not a typical romantic lead, but he felt real to me, and there's a feeling of earned wisdom by its ending. Greg, what did you think?
I think I was in a similar place. So, just in case listeners don't recall, this is one of my 4 hype draft movies. And, my first pick, Phoenician Scheme, I would say disappointed. It's not that it's a bad movie, but it was a little soft on. And then the buzz on this was kind of sour coming out of some of its early festival screenings. So I was very, very nervous for those reasons. In addition to the kind of I love this book so much. I really hope they get it right. And I thought this was fantastic. I had a really wonderful time. It is a small release, as Jen alluded to, and I'm curious to unpack that a little bit more. It's a big, I can't even say a big entry, but it's an entry by Mubi, who is making big moves in this space and coming off of their great success with The Substance, I think is ready to be more of a player. And yet they don't seem to be like really behind this movie in a lot of ways, kind of having that small release. And we'll talk about it more. But I will say, I think it is a film that you have to be prepared for kind of stillness and a kind of small film in terms of scope in some ways, and an intimate film. But over the course of its runtime, I just found myself kind of swept away in it. I am a good old-fashioned New England boy, so walking in the woods is like half my life. And so when we get like iconic actors just walking in the woods in Maine, I was there, and I was really appreciative of how beautifully they shot this. In case it doesn't get mentioned in this first part, like the characters are great, the writing is phenomenal, but I thought the actual cinematography was really well done here. And I do every once in a while get swept up in movie magic where I'm like, how did they get that perfect light? And I saw another movie this weekend that faked it all the time, and it was so obvious and so terrible that when I saw this, I was like, this is like, they're really there. And I picture them going to some remote pond, waiting until just the right moment, getting that little shot, and then moving on, because there's so many of those kind of small moments, not even full scenes, I would say. So I really loved all of this. I was very moved by it. And I will say the ending did not disappoint me or strike a sour chord, despite what some of the other reviews out there say. So I enjoyed it all the way through. But Jen, you've struggled with Paul Mescal in the past, specifically in Gladiator, which is so similar to this movie. I really, but joking aside, how did you feel about this film?
I really like this. I have to say it really exceeded my expectations. I was pretty skeptical going in for a number of reasons. One, as Greg alluded to, the sort of muted reception out of Cannes, right? To this premiere, Cannes?
I think so.
Yeah. So the early reaction to it was kind of like, meh. And I was like, oh no. And then when I found out the other factor is that when I found out that this was only focusing on one storyline from the book, I was like, well, then it can't possibly be good, because what I love so much about the book is how the stories are interconnected, right? So I was kind of going into this prepared to not like it, or prepared to be disappointed. I definitely was not. I really enjoyed it. I did think the two central performances, Josh O'Connor and Paul Mescal, are incredible. They do so much. They have such amazing chemistry with each other. And we'll talk about sort of like critiques that people have of the portrayal of their relationship. I'm sure I don't really agree with those, but I don't. It's not that I'm without notes for the movie, I would say, because I think I have a couple of notes, which I probably will have to get into only in spoiler mode. But for me, the thing that we haven't talked about yet is that when I was like, okay, what can this film adaptation offer us that the book can't? And that to me was the music. And I was like, well, if they can nail the singing in this, and the use of music and the use of these folk songs, then I'll be happy. And I certainly was. And so I just feel like to the point where when I got home from watching this movie, I raced right to Spotify, and I was like, please tell me the soundtrack for this is here. And it is not. There's some good citizen who has tried to make a playlist but it was in anticipation of the movie, right? They were trying to, based on the book, they were trying to like find songs that would kind of like be inspired by the movie potentially. And then they said they promised to update it once they saw the movie, and I was just like, this is like I need these songs. I need to listen to these recordings again. And I also think that the use of music in this really supports the storytelling in a way that I was not necessarily anticipating. So yeah, big fan. All right. So we're big fans of this, it sounds like. But who else is going to really like this movie? We will go to the recommendation algorithm in which we establish the audience of the film. So this segment acknowledges that not every film is for everyone, right? And this, with a smaller movie and a quieter movie, as we've kind of noted, maybe that's more true than with other things. But the reviews for this film in particular, even the positive ones, have described this as restrained and slow paced. And again, some people just observe that as like a quality of the film. Other people are framing that as a negative, like it's not a good movie because of those things. Do we agree? What do we think?
I do think it is. This is so silly. Sorry, my mind is racing because I've just been in class right now. I just had my students read 3 narratives over the course of the last 3 classes, and then we discuss narrative quality. And I always get those reactions like, "This is slow," like why? And I do wonder, like it's just always on my mind, like what are people looking for? Like high speed, fast romance? I don't quite get that. So I was giggling to myself about that I'm just living in the everything's too slow mode at the moment. I do think that the pacing here fits the story really nicely. And, something, so my wife works in publishing, and kind of my standard order for her is that any book that comes out that's like somebody's whole lifetime, like I love, that's like my favorite kind of fiction, is like a Charles Dickens, I was born and here's my whole life. And I feel like that made me more inclined to really like this film because it has that kind of wide sweep, not birth to death in these characters, but a good number of years and a lot of, movement around a small region, but no, a little bit around the world by film's end. We'll not spoil that. So I do think you have to be prepared for something slowly paced. But when you were talking about the music, Jen, the film I was thinking a lot about, so I'll give 2 for recommendation algorithm. One is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which I joked in our text message thread that my Letterboxd review should have been O'Connor, Where Art Thou? And I found myself, as you were just describing that the soundtrack wasn't there, I was thinking like that soundtrack was such a huge like cultural moment. I remember seeing that movie and liking it, but then I played the soundtrack endlessly on CD at the time, I believe. So it would be a nice companion piece, even though they're tonally quite different, just the kind of attention to folk music. And then because it's good old Paul Mescal, I was thinking a lot about After Sun. And so in terms of your question about pacing and how this is kind of very much kind of on the level of 2 people in their relationship, a very different relationship. That's a father-daughter relationship. But, I think he burst onto the scene with that movie because he's so good at those small interiority moves where you can tell he's thinking, you can tell he's building something. So those would be my 2 very different recommendations. Like you're picking a wildly different double feature bill if you pick one of my 2. Antonio, what do you think?
I have a more basic comp. So for another excellent literary adaptation with an unlikely love story at its center, I'd say check out James Ivory's Howard's End, a movie from the early 90s, which holds up just brilliantly today. And just like its wonderful source material, the Ian Forster novel by the same name. So yeah, there the central couple is Emma Thompson and Anthony Hopkins. But their characters, they have some similarities, not many with the central duo here. But the dynamic is just really interesting, and I to me, it's just one of my favorite movies of all time. Jen, how about you?
So I would say that this film is. I think people need to look up these words in the dictionary. It the film, I would say, is restrained, but I think it's not repressed, and that's what people are kind of Like, I think that's when people are saying it's restrained, they really mean repressed. And again, I don't want to, we're not in spoiler mode yet, so I can't really elaborate on why or what we mean by that. But I think a lot of people, when they heard this film was coming out, it got pitched to them, not necessarily as an adaptation of the source material, but as, oh, this is a gay romance with Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor. And then people sort of ran with that idea in a way that I think they were picturing something much like steamier in the traditional sense. And then when they didn't get that, that's where the muted response came from. But I would say that I thought it was like really refreshing how the movie took its time with their relationship and had like that sense of stillness that you're both talking about. And wasn't necessarily about, well, that's getting into spoiler mode, so I won't say that, but I'll save that comment for later. But I'd say in terms of comps, I actually thought of the other Paul Mescal movie that recently has come out, and that was All of Us Strangers, except Swap put him in the Andrew Scott role, because it does kind of have a little bit of a not as surrealist as All of Us Strangers at times, but it does have that kind of dreamlike quality to it in places. So I think I think that's the vibe, that if you like the vibe of that movie, I think you'll be okay with this one. Just add like it's also a period piece, so you can add that layer as well. And also there's folk music, and also there's so yeah, there's actually a lot going on. My other comp was going to be A Complete Unknown. That's a low hanging fruit. I think if you like people working out their relationship and communicating with people they're in relationships with through music and how they perform music, this is for you.
I think that's an interesting point, though, Jen, that the casting of Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor, which makes a lot of sense in that they're two, like you couldn't get two actors who are more like popular, on the rise, and but that the casting of them set up an expectation that the movie sort of unfairly is sort of expected to manifest. And they've both like had sort of like steamy, sexy roles before, like challengers for Josh O'Connor, normal people for Paul Mescal. And if you had cast like just two sort of relatively unknown like theater actors in the same piece, for it, the expectations would have been different, probably closer to what the movie actually has ended up being. But yeah, I think that's interesting.
And I mean, like, for those of you who are like on the fence about whether or not you want to go see it, if you are familiar with the opening shot of half a butt in the beginning of Challengers, you will not be disappointed in this movie. That's all I'm saying. Like, so it's not like there's nothing in here for people who are like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm just trying to get people to see this movie. I'll do whatever it takes,
Yeah,
I watch it to see which half of the butt.
Yes, I won't spoil that, at least.
Yeah. I was spending my afternoon today, like one does, watching the cinematic classic Spartacus, because I'd never seen Spartacus. And my son came in, and there's a scene going on with two people having a dialogue. And in the background, there is a Roman statue with its butt showing. And Henry just says, "Why do those people have a butt in their house?" And I hadn't even seen it, and I hadn't even noticed it. But I was like, "Good question, buddy. Like, why do they have a butt in their house?" So yeah. I do think Challengers is steamier than this, and yet I also remember some of that discourse there too, because it was so steamy in the trailers for Challengers that I think people are like, what are they holding back? And as I recall, like, not much, right? Like, it kind of was all on display in the trailer. So it's funny because there's this larger discourse about like movies are a lot less steamy than they used to be, and maybe there's hunger to get more of that. But at the same time, I don't understand what that crowd is wanting. Maybe it's just the other half of the butt. Maybe I'm just overcomplicating it, but
well, so the other thing too is like, this is me arguing back against the straw man argument that Antonio set up by giving us this question. But I feel like now, if I were to go back and listen to all the critics out of Cannes complaining about this movie, I would be like, sure, there isn't as much like graphic sex in this movie, but it's very intimate. Like the intimacy is there. And so again, yeah, it goes back to Greg's question of like what it like I guess people's needs are very specific when it comes to something like this. But anyway, so I've really got invested in their relationship in a way that I think the early reviews of this would not have indicated.
Maybe another comp is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which I think everything pales in comparison to that. But like that is an extremely sexy movie without really having a ton of graphic sex scenes, or right? It's a little steamier than this, I would say, but at the same time, it's like it's mostly implied and it's about romance, not sex in that movie, certainly. So yeah, curious what people do want, because like they also didn't want queer, right? Like so we're on some kind of spectrum here, but it's specifically because it's gay men. I do think the argument is natural to flow towards, and I always heard this leveled at Will and Grace, right? Groundbreaking show, lead male character is gay, but Will is a very chaste character, right? And so I do think there's this kind of cultural stereotype of, well, we can say these characters are gay, but we don't actually want to see that they're gay, right? Or something like that. Or you have to be Jack. You have to be so outlandishly flamboyant, and this film is finding neither of those, and I would say is much more authentic and real than either of those types of cultural figures. But maybe we should wait and get into it in spoilers.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing I stopped myself from saying earlier again. So I think that's probably a clear sign that we need to go. So yes, if you have not seen The History of Sound, hopefully we've given you enough sense of what it's like and what we liked about it that you will want to go see it. So if you do not want it spoiled, turn back now, go watch the movie. Hopefully it'll be out in theaters for a little while. It might not be. I don't know. We'll see. I haven't been tracking the box office or anything. But yeah, go watch the movie and return and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. Okay, so Antonio has given us a really juicy question so we can like dig right into this movie. I was like, when I saw this, I was like, yes, like I can't wait to talk about this. So we're going to start with one of Lionel's key conclusions at the end of the movie, what he terms a cold, hard fact that he should never have left Maine. He should have found a way to stay with David. Right. So this is like, and this is something that's lifted right from that line is right from the book. From what I remember. So he comes to this, like the big part of the movie's turning point is this realization that when he learns not only that David died, but how he died. So the question is, do you think that David's fate would have been different if Lionel hadn't left? Greg, you start.
Okay. I mean, there is something where Antonio wrote this, so it's like the professor gave us a quiz, and we have to like, yeah. Well, and talking to my students about narratives this week, it's funny how often somebody brought up when they read a book in high school that ended on a cliffhanger, how often they got assigned to write the next chapter of a book. This is a thing high schools are doing, apparently. A lot, at least here in the Northeast. I don't understand.
Seems like a big ask. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Like just and maybe there's beauty in indeterminacy too, right? Like maybe that's how that should be. So I think it's a good question to ask, and it's also like an impossible question to answer, right? In the good way a film would put this together, and the kind of simple and neat version of it would be, that David is denying his true self, right? That he, it's very interesting to me that, and I would say a real strength of the film is that they very much play into the 1917s, right? Like that there's not even like language to talk about what these men have together, right? They can't come out in a traditional sense, and they can't express they can express love, but they don't, have language to kind of say what they're feeling because, I think I don't know, Jen just yelled at me to get the dictionary, but I think they are repressed in the way they can, in addition to being restrained, but they have to fit into this mold within this. So I think I'm tempted by the simple answer of like, if he'd been allowed to be his real self, if they'd gotten appointments together at the conservatory somewhere and had lived a life together, probably pretending they were roommates, just roommates for the time period. I think there is hope for it there. But, I do think there's a real suggestion of what at the time would have been called being shell shocked, right? Or battle fatigue, what we would call PTSD today. And that I think that might have been affecting him a lot more. So there's a way in which I think the escape and the wonderful trip they went on was the Band-Aid on top of those deeper problems. And so there to be able to just say like, and they would have lived happily ever after feels not right. Cause I think that deeper problem was still there. When they have a real dust up out on the trail, when things get unhappy, it is more about like assumptions about who Josh O'Connor is and what he's seen. Sorry, who David is. Josh O'Connor, we all know who he is. But who David is and what he's seen and what he hasn't seen. And he's offended by Lionel's assumptions about that. So it feels like there's still a wound there, and I want to believe they would have found a way to heal it. Jen, since the professor made the questions, you have to take them second to try to get a better grade than me on this term paper.
I was going to anyway because I slightly disagree with you. So I think the thing I've almost said twice during not spoiler mode, and it's not even that big of a spoiler. I'm just overly paranoid about spoilers. But what I was going to say earlier was that one of the things I really liked both about the original stories and the film is that it doesn't feel like a period gay romance film that is obsessed with the characters getting caught. Right. And the anxiety about, oh, people are going to find out, oh, we're not accepted. I feel like it really does stand on its own as a romance, regardless of kind of the orientation of those involved. Right. Like, I think like and I kept expecting it to be that way just because of the premise of the story. I kept expecting someone to like discover them on the trail. And then like there's one scene in the book which doesn't occur in the movie where like they describe like a woman finds them in the woods and like kind of kicks them and says, "Hey, you can't be here." And it's never said, nothing about what they're doing there is commented on, or kind of like, you know what I mean? Like they're not called any names or anything like that. But like, it's like that was the closest I feel like the book gets to like society doesn't accept them. Right. But I do think that the film actually kind of leans into that a little bit more than the book, because it makes a big scene out of David saying, "Well, do you worry about what we're doing here?" And then Lionel says, "I don't worry," and he says, "I admire you." Right? Like that is technically in the book, but I think the way it's directed and the way it's presented in the movie definitely cues us to be like, oh, like Lionel had like comfortable about this, and David envied his not worrying about it and had the sense of shame. But I think that David actually would have like David's fate, I think, was unavoidable, or at least that's how the film presents it, because of the references to like the darkness, and that I really love the close up when they're in the train station of his hand that's shaking, because it tells you so much without really like overdoing it. But that's kind of my take. My take is that like because of the darkness of his PTSD, and part of it is probably the like frustration and self-loathing that's involved with him not being as kind of like open about their relationship as Lionel. Antonio, what do you think? You asked this question.
Well, I think that David's charm is like clear from the beginning, but I think that even before he goes off to war, there's something about his happiness that feels a little unstable. And he reminds me of sort of like when family members of famous comedians reveal how serious their partners are in real life. We like to imagine that like the fun and gregarious people that we know in a certain context are that way just all the time. But people are complicated, and like our presented selves often mask fragility. And I think that what I loved about the moment, Jen, that you mentioned when David asked that question is that, Lionel, who is presented who as sort of outwardly looking, seeming the more repressed, the more buttoned up, the fact that he says like, no, I'm not worried. And that you believe it, right? Because Lionel really kind of doesn't have a presented self. It's just sort of like Lionel is Lionel. And I think that when he says that he admires him both for just sort of like being able to own that, and then just being sort of comfortable kind of, being boring at times to the world, right? Not caring as much about what other people think. There's just a lot that's sort of loaded in that statement that that when I heard it on the screen, when I reread it on the page, I think it unlocks a lot about their dynamic,
Mhm.
and about also why I think that I agree. I think that David probably there was nothing that was going to save David.
That and the scene with Belle in the kitchen, which,
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, is not in the book as we
it's
see
not.
it, right?
They
And
they
I
never
think
meet in the book.
okay, yes, so I mean, that scene is very powerful and extremely well acted, so I'm glad it's in the
Yeah.
movie, but it also kind of contributes like, that paired with the scene we were just talking about, I think really does frame it as David was trying to lead this double life. He was trying to force himself into a traditional heterosexual marriage with a girl that he thought other people would think would be a good match for him, right? And denying his own happiness with Lionel instead, right? That's I feel like that's the implication of including when you include that scene in the kitchen where they're talking about the time, because it's so specific about ironing out the timeline of events in
Mm.
a way that I don't remember knowing in the book in terms of like who met who, went whom when, and who went where, and like he because like the idea that he was already engaged, David was already engaged to Belle by the time before they went on the trip, the song finding trip. So yeah, that was a really good question. And I think, all right, a number of reviewers. So yeah, we're just gonna be like waving our fingers at the other critics who are more critical of this movie. A number of
Yeah.
reviewers seem frustrated that Lionel as like a central uh, POV character. So he's too passive. I think Oliver Jimenez is getting lumped into that too, because I feel like I've heard a bunch of people complain that the direction is also really passive, which I'm like, I don't even really know what that means. Do you know what I mean? Like I think they are blaming the portrayal of Lionel on like he's not like Jimenez doesn't have a strong directorial hand, but I don't think that's right. I don't.
I think this is silly. And granted, like I've read a lot of more reviews for this since I was preparing the outline, and I was kind of stunned by and I just disagreed and like just flat out disagreed with a lot of these things. So I was curious about your take. I'll start this one because the passivity point in particular, I just don't agree with it. I think that you know he does some things in this movie that I think are pretty startling, like when he leaves his mother, his sick mother, and demonstrates kind of little remorse for the choice. He does the same to Clarissa. He does the same to Vincent. He leaves a famous choir because it's boring, right? He if he doesn't always act on what he wants, he definitely knows what he doesn't want. And while one can say that he chased love too late, he's at the very least unafraid to cleave himself from unhappiness. So I thought that was really well conveyed and sort of like an interesting kind of character to follow in this context. What do you two think?
I thought that was really well said, Antonio. And one of the I wouldn't put this as a comp for this movie, but it was actually making me think about I saw the TV Glow and that
Mm-hmm.
idea of what happens. One reading of that film being it's a trans narrative for somebody who never actually comes out as trans, right? And I'm sorry, I forget the exact word for it, but the moment you choose not to kind of pursue your actual gender identity, but pass in your born gender identity. And I do think that there's a quality of Lionel here that is ghost-like in the way that character became in that movie to me, right? Like he is active in all the ways you just said, and he makes those very big choices. But I do think there's this way in which it's always just a ghost of who he was, that he was the most alive in the woods in Maine that one summer.
Yeah.
And then this becomes this like seeking that high again. And it feels like the only way to get it is to be back with David. And when that path is closed for repeatedly for him, he goes and he tries to make a go of it back on the farm. And then he clearly is a very successful musician. I mean, the cut to Rome was kind of like, whoa, like it was so jarring in the context of this film because it was so different and more and larger. And then some time at Oxford as well, right? And all of that felt, I mean, it took this story I remembered as being very small. I mean, I put the joke in the chat, but I remember it as just being two guys in a tent, right? And like the beauty of a good summer with your buddy, more than buddy, in a tent in Maine. And so I was like, oh wow, this really kind of blew way out there, but he never felt wholly present, and that makes the Jen's comparison to the other Mescal movie pretty good too. And so there's this ghost like quality that is drifting through all of this, but I found that to be a real strength, right? Like, as somebody who hasn't lived that kind of life, I was feeling this great empathy for a man trying to find some way to fit into the life that everybody else would envy, but it just all rings hollow to him. You know, the scene where he is walking around after his mom passes and the people on the farm are at the general store, like, why'd you come back? Like, why are you here? And he's like, so like much a ghost of his past self. He's like, and he's like, no, he's a famous musician. Like, he's been all over the world, and it doesn't seem real. So I think that is a feature, not a bug. Like, I really think people are misunderstanding that part of the point here is to say, like, yeah, maybe this is just one summer, but like, God, how many times have we seen the hetero male version of that, where they're buying the car they had in high school and like trying to relive glory days, right? And it's like that same emotion, but we don't accept it as much, or we demand something else of it, I think, in queer stories. Jen, you seem like the one to ask about middle-aged men and their chasing of former glory. You spend too much time with three of them, as I recall.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. I was going to be like, no. Yeah, so to me, the string of choices that Antonio outlines, to me, felt like highlighting and in a lot of ways expanding the tragedy of Lionel, because, you know, I think, again, the film emphasizes a little bit more than the book. You get the sense that David is sort of setting Lionel free, right? Because he says, you know, if I had your voice, I would go. He's the one who says Rome, right? He's like, I would go to Rome, I would go to Paris, I would live this amazing life that you could have with the talent that you have, right? And so part of you know what you can sort of see, especially at the end when we hear David sort of like saying his last goodbye, is that he sort of like recognizes the grand life that Lionel could have and knows that he would hold him back from it. And then the tragedy of us seeing, right, in the book it's like half a sentence, but seeing his other relationships and how his career does blossom, and yet he feels empty inside still. I would say that it's meant to kind of show us how nothing and no one was ever good enough after David was gone. Right. And It's really sad. It's so sad. It's like, especially at the end, which I want to spend like I want the ending to have its own conversation. So I'm not going to dip into talking about that.
That's hour 3 is just the ending. Yeah.
So my only, and this is where I'm going to slide in my one like big note that I have about the movie, and this is in my Letterboxd review, so you probably already know this, but to me, I understood why we were spending the middle of the movie without David and with these other people, to sort of like show the contrast, right? And to show like, oh, like, you know, he basically, like, Lionel basically lives in a mini episode of A Downton Abbey for like 20 minutes. And you're like, this seems so great. And he's just like, no, I don't want this. Right? I'm going to sleep on the floor next to the piano. And I think that my only complaint is that those characters, Vincent and Clarissa, can't really be developed enough for me to care about them and to and I didn't understand, like, they were from the start, they were always token relationships to me and not real characters in the story. And so the fact that we spent more time with them than the half a sentence we get in the book felt to me like a little, not wasted, but like felt like, okay, I get it. Like, we don't need to spend this long with these people. Or I wish it had committed one way or the other, like either to make it much shorter and kind of almost like a montage of like, here are all these other relationships he had and kind of where he went, or to actually spend more time with them so we actually get attached to them and kind of get invested in these could have been relationships and see how they kind of fall apart because it's not David.
It's interesting. I think it would have been what the difficulty of it is that the movie never shifts from Lionel's point of view, right? So to get more, I think more of like Clarissa or Vincent, you need to break away from it. I think to a degree, because part of the point of Lionel is that he doesn't pay that much attention to them,
Right.
right? And so there is an interesting sort of inversion that like you get the sense that Lionel to them is like could be their version of like
Of
David,
David.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like particularly Vincent, and just the way that he looks at him, and just like the admiration that he feels, and then the heartbreak that he feels when Lionel makes clear, and like Lionel in both sort of scenes where he's sort of like ending it, it is sort of like brutal. It's incredibly brutal, not in what he's saying, but in sort of like what he's just refusing to say, and just like the blankness in his face, to where like the other person just can read it and can see like you're done with me. And so watching that happen, twice in the course of the movie, like, I get the complaints that like that those acts just don't feel as vital. I mean, that's sort of that is the point. But that doesn't necessarily make for like visceral, like I'm enjoying this cinema. But I don't know. It still sort of worked for me even in the course of the film. Like I watched it with my wife Janine, and when she left, her review was basically like, I liked it, and then I didn't like it, and I liked it, and I was like, I think that's right. Like I think that
Right. That's what you're supposed to.
that's the rhythm of the film, and it's sort of designed that way.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. And the other thing too is like he states the way he breaks up with them is just by stating cold hard facts, right? Like where he
Yeah.
says, I am taking this job.
Yeah.
And then he's like, and then like Vincent has to fill in the blanks and be like, wait, so that means you're breaking up with me, as opposed to him being like, I've really enjoyed our time together. You mean so much to me. Like he dispenses with all of that sort of nicety, and it's just like, this is a thing that's happening, and then just doesn't say anything else.
Well, and you can throw his mom in as a third
Yes.
breakup in exactly that same way, right?
Right.
Like
I'm leaving for a while. Yeah.
Very cold. I'm just going, and I do think he expresses genuine regret when she passes before he makes it back. But I do think, and that's where I get that ghost-like quality, because he's certainly not trying to be mean in those moments in a way, even though it is a very cold and brutal way to kind of break up with someone. And I was probably closer to Antonio than Jen, that I do think there was just a way in like we needed a lot of time to pass. So you had to fill that in the movie. Even though, we did make time jumps, if you suddenly jump 20 years or so, we wouldn't have felt that like longing or the evolution of the character, perhaps. The moment I couldn't really figure out is, when he's breaking up with Clarissa in the stairwell, and she's like, my mom said you were going to break up with me. I didn't understand that.
What was that about?
That conversation? Yeah. I'm like, maybe because we didn't see the mom and him interact a lot, but like the interaction they did have, he was kind of, he was one of the more gregarious moments he has. He's, he's hugging them. He's like diving in. And then it's like, so did she think he was cheating on her? Could she sense that he wasn't, really attracted to her? I didn't really understand.
Right. I assumed it was because she could see the dynamic that we're describing of Clarissa is head over heels for Lionel. Lionel is just okay with Clarissa. You know what I mean? Like, or that their relationship is imbalanced in terms of how invested they are in it. So maybe that's what she kind of could see the heartbreak coming down the road potentially. That's how I took it. But I also was kind of like, wait, what's that about? What's that?
Yeah. Did they sleep together? I don't know.
Maybe she went to get a drink of water early in the morning and saw him sleeping on the floor
by the
and
piano.
was like, oh, this can't be good. All right. So let's shift to Josh O'Connor's David. He's the more gregarious and charming of the two, right? As we've kind of already talked about. He's quicker to smile, but the smile never lasts very long. And he has that kind of like darkness to him that so I actually have something to say about this before I keep going. I listened to, I know, sorry. I'm just know I'm going to forget later if I don't say it now. The Little Go Men book club episode. I don't know if either of you listened to that, where they interview Ben Shattuck at the end. And one thing that really stuck with me is that he described David and Lionel in terms of having elemental differences, and that he thought Lionel was of the air, right? He's airy and sort of like the beautiful image of the like tea bag that he lights on fire and
Oh
then it
yeah,
floats
yeah,
up. So good.
yeah.
But that David is more like metallic, like he's like the of the earth or of iron or something like that, and so like kind of like a hard metal. And I thought that was super interesting as a way to think about two different characters. But anyway, maybe that will come into play when we actually get to the question I'm about to ask. As in his past work in The Crown and Challengers, O'Connor excels at showcasing inner turmoil. Just when we think we're getting a grasp on him, he slips away, right? So I would use the word mercurial to describe David and Josh O'Connor's ability to portray him, right? While Lionel is continually drawn to David, David often keeps Lionel at a distance, right? And we actually talked about how Lionel then flips it and actually does the same thing to these other people, right? Is it because of Belle or something else? Like, what is motivating David keeping Lionel at arm's length?
So I think Antonio's phrasing of the question is very good to bring up those kind of past roles because I naturally kind of thought of Josh O'Connor as like the dirtbag, right? Because the image to me is him sleeping in his car outside the tennis tournament from Challengers. That's kind of who he is to me. But I I think to me what it is the kind of key to unlocking it for me is that late revelation that there was never even a project. Like it wasn't just that the trip was a secret or something. There was no project whatsoever. Right? It's not just that he wanted to escape with Lionel for the summer, but there was actually no research happening in a meaningful way. He was just capturing these songs seemingly for the joy and the beauty of capturing them, right? And so that to me is kind of if you peel away all the layers of the scumbag onion, there's nothing there because it's all been constructed and a lie. And I think that that's part of why he pushes Lionel away to avoid that kind of discovery. And again, I already referenced when they get in their fight on the trail in Maine, it's like assuming what he's like because he was raised in Newport and what he would have seen or not seen. And that's another moment of really strong pushback because the myth of who he is doesn't match the reality. And he's afraid of that myth breaking down and people seeing whatever's all the way inside.
Yeah, for me, the song collecting mission is like a big part of this. I think think about the kind of person who's naturally drawn to that kind of pathos, that kind of like pain. And while at times I think David can seem kind of callous himself in the way that he shapeshifts to sort of get what he wants with the various people he's collecting from, what he wants is like weighty, and you can see that it takes a toll over time. He's a person who feels intensely and wildly, but is also deeply private. I mean, even at the beginning of their affair, he leaves the next morning and only sees Lionel once a week, right? And I think that also says something about him, about his sort of capacity for long-term joy.
And I think something that the film, again, because it can expand on something from the book, like there's a whole scene where he explains his past, which I don't think we actually get in the book from what I remember, about that he learned how to collect these songs from his uncle, right? Who was his last living family member. And it sounds like that the loss of him was deeply felt, right? That like uh and that he is also that has also trained him to have this sort of flippant attitude towards death, right? Which or like a weird like fascination but also fear of death or something about death, right? Because the what he says because I think Lionel says something like, "Oh, I'm really sorry about your uncle." He says, "Well, we all die at some point. You do know that, don't you?" And I do think that like it's that kind of like snarkiness that defines the character, but also is like him covering up something much darker and deeper, right? So to me, like Belle largely seems like irrelevant in some ways. And that's her tragedy, right? That she got
Yeah.
pulled into this
Yeah.
thinking she was marrying the love of her life and like, oh, he's lived next door this whole time and like now he sees me. Like you can there's a whole other movie that's like the hetero rom-com version of that. You know what I mean? That she thinks that's the fantasy she thinks they're both living in. And the reality is that she is just a means to an end, right? She's yet another thing David is trying to use to sort of like as a balm for his wounds or to kind of cover up the darkness, but it doesn't work, right? And so to me, I feel like it's not that even though the timing is suspicious in terms of like he was in a relationship with Belle already, I think that's totally not the point. I think David was just trying to cobble together something he thought was a life he was supposed to have, and that that was always some kind of veneer that he had, right? So which is what makes that scene so sad, because he like she really, you could tell that the actress who plays Belle, who I was not familiar with before this, like did a really good job, because you could tell that she really loved him and that like and thought the world of him and got drawn into his world sort of like Lionel does, but that their relationship really wasn't true. It was like built on a lie, kind of.
I will say, if there's a third character in the film who I actually have a sense of like what their life is and like the pain they felt and like who feels the closest to like a three-dimensional character, it's her. Like the monologue that she delivers, and this was, the actress's name is Hadley Robinson. I was also not familiar with her, but I thought that was just an incredible scene. And that is, even though Belle is in the book, she doesn't have a scene like this in the book. She interacts with someone else who's looking for Lionel, and I think it makes absolute sense in the adaptation to just have them face to face and the sort of like discomfort of just them being in the same place. And the fact that she's like, no, stay. I want you to stay. And he clearly doesn't want to stay, but she's got something to say, and man, when she delivers all of this, it's just like a lifetime's worth of pain, but delivered in a tender way that still honors like what she loved, I think, about David, and still is kind of respectful toward Lionel, right? Even though there's got to be like a like a wellspring of resentment, and like the marriage that she's in is also not great. I also love the moment when the new husband says like, "Oh, you're collecting music. What kind of music is that?" And then Lionel says, "What kind of work do you do?" Right? It's just it's like Lionel being a little bit tart in a way that like he normally isn't in the course of the movie, but it was nice to see that shade of him as well.
The new husband line I loved is like when he's like, "Are you going to be okay with him?" Right? Like he's very protective of her, and
he literally says, "Don't do anything to my wife."
Yeah, and then she
so
tears
awkward.
him apart, right? Like she rips him down, as the case were, or destroys his life. Doesn't rip him down, but just want to echo, like, didn't know that actress either. Really wonderfully acted scene, and the choice I particularly loved is they really don't define what's in the letters. And I love that as a choice, because it could be all the graphic details, right? And it could really spell it out in all details, or it could be like a lot of innuendo and sweetness, right? Love without, really tipping their hands. And I love that the movie lets you imagine that, and lets you imagine her sitting and reading those and watching this unfold over months. Again, just flaunting my New England, like to be transplanted from the rich mansion town of Newport, Rhode Island, up in the woods outside Bowdoin. Like that's rough going. So that transplant from, one society to the other. And I think, Jen, you nailed it right. I mean, it sounded like, a young professional man, a young professor is expected to have the cute homemaker wife who will put the cocktail party together when the boys come over from the department, or what have you. And so I think all of that existed then, and is kind of what she signed up for, and now is a firefighter's wife. And I found myself like, I hope he's good to her. I hope it's a good life, right? Because, of
that guy
how
seems
much
like the worst.
suffered.
I don't know, Greg. the way he was like, I gotta leave in 20 minutes. Is dinner gonna be ready? I'm like, get out of here, dude.
Yeah.
Come on. Like, but so I think the last thing I'll say about the scene, I think, is the nuance of, and this part of this is the actress's performance, is she at once is yearning for his companionship, Lionel's, because he's the one person in the whole world who can kind of understand what she lost, right? And when she says like, "Oh, please stay. I haven't had any like," and also like she's a mom of an infant, like so she sees nobody.
Well, that felt real. Yeah, that felt very real.
So she's like, "Please, I haven't had anyone over in like months." But so she's kind of yearning to talk to Lionel about David, right? Because because obviously the firefighter doesn't get it. And nothing against firefighters, so I shouldn't have said that. But other firefighters very nice and caring to their spouses. But then the spikes of the resentment come out, right? Because she's read the letters, and I think it doesn't. Yeah, I think Greg's point is well taken in terms of like it's better to leave it up to us as opposed to like having a montage of like David voiceover of the letter, David and Lionel voiceover of the letters, like in an epistolary novel style, right? Like that would be bad. But I do think that the one thing that I do take away from that exchange about the letters and how she puts them on the table and stuff like that is that she has read those letters, and regardless of what is in them or what's said in them, she recognizes that their love was real and hers was not. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what makes that scene so tragic. It's like,
yeah.
Yeah. Also the way that Paul Mescal, when she leaves the room and he grabs the letters and then just ignores, like he doesn't write down his address and he just runs out of there as fast as possible. I thought that was really well done. Like he just can't bear to be in that situation anymore because he just has to go somewhere else. He has to go into the field and touch grass and grieve. But all right. So next up, where are we? We spend a lot of time with Lionel's family and on the farm, and that actually I would say is one of the biggest adaptation choices compared to the book, because I feel like, again, Lionel's parents are like a lot, like a sentence in the book or like a paragraph, and then now they have multiple scenes across the whole film. David's parents died when he was young, but he comes from a family of means. How does the class divide between them factor into their relationship? Oh, I'm glad you asked this question. Greg, do you have thoughts?
It doesn't. On to you, Jen. No. I was debating. I struggled at times with the farm. I mean, again, I'm gonna harp on again about how beautifully shot this is, because there are times when like Paul Mescal is like building a fence, and I'm like, damn, should I be out building fences? Like it looks like just like a great life to be out there eating potatoes and building fences. But I I think it's really interesting as a question because it's almost like it shifts over time. And Jen, your joke earlier that Lionel ends up in an episode of Downton Abbey kind of fits with that, right? Like that we see the extremes of class across Lionel's life, that he's on the farm at times and then far surpasses, one would imagine, what David got to experience, even though he was born into that upper class life. And again, in case people are only familiar with Newport from the folk festival in the Bob Dylan movie, the Newport is a town in Rhode Island with, from the Gilded Age, so well established by this time, just the mansions of the incredibly wealthy, robber barons of the Gilded Age. And so he's like, I interpret it purely as like a high society can do whatever he wants, even as an orphan, and, circulates in a pretty privileged space. And so I thought that made, everything that was supposed to be easy happened for him, and he still wasn't fulfilled. I suspect that might be why he decided to go to war, right? Like there's something to that, it feels like. And yet Lionel's the opposite. He works so incredibly hard for each, and then only felt that fulfillment living in a tent for one summer, right? And what that life was like. The moment we haven't talked about from their travels is when they visit the island that is being evacuated. Something that I don't know if I assume that's real history, right? But an island with particularly Irish and Black, community that the governor has taken control of the land and they're getting kicked off. And this theme of kind of legacy and how permanent or impermanent something is feels so present there, as you're seeing these two characters with a dying society who come at it from very opposite directions. And, if the music is all that's going to last, then that is like to them a symbol of all of that kind of woven together. I don't know. I'm being inarticulate. What did you think,
Oh,
Antonio?
so I wanted to go to a moment. I was thinking in particular about the moment when Lionel first comes for the summer, when he arrives at the Augusta train station, but then they have to go catch a second train right away. And David seems sort of like Lionel's like, well, what's going on? What are we gonna do for this or whatever? And David says something to the effect of just basically like, we'll figure it out. Right. In a way that someone who's always had money can, I think, kind of say, right? Like, we can just go anywhere and it'll be fine. David, by contrast, says like, well, I haven't eaten all day. And that seems like, like it could be played as a sort of like comic moment, like, these two have like are wildly different like days, these two, but they're together. And it's unclear if this registers to David as anything more than a curiosity. David lives like a vagabond on the camping trip, but that's because it's all just sort of like a romantic adventure to him. Lyle knows eventually he'll need money, so his being there is a bigger sacrifice, one that he happily takes. One other thing that came to mind while Greg was giving your response to this was a line that I'm not sure if this is in the book or not, but it's such a great line when David is describing his past and he talks about his parents dying. Lionel is understandably like, I'm really sorry, and he says like, I think like temporarily unparented or something like that was a line that he said. And that's also really funny, right? But again, I think it hints at something about David, that there's like darkness that he can put a little sparkle on, and that he can distract you from, right? Like, it's not like he's totally avoiding it. He confronts it, but in a way that makes you think like, oh, he's got it all together. He's like processed it, and now it's just like a witty thing that he can say. But that there is actual like real pain that's associated there that he can't quite confront in a direct way.
I really love those comments, Antonio, and I want to have you read a kind of symbol from the film in the context of everything you just said, which is in that scene you were referencing, there's a pause to focus on the fact that Lionel brought a pillow, and it's kind of a funny interchange there. And then at the end of the trip, there's this seemingly very tender moment where Josh O'Connor picks up the feathers that have fallen out of the pillow, slides them back in, and never calls it out, never confronts Lionel about it. So do you think that's kind of a part of that interplay in some way? Is it just meant to show intimacy? How do you read the pillow? Pillow
Yeah,
talk. Hey, there's the joke I
that's
missed.
yeah. I mean, the pillow is something from home, right? And it wears in the course of the trip, right? And then you see continuing images of it over the course of the camping trip. And this maybe is also a little bit of a necessary sort of acknowledgement of just like, of, I don't know, how their relationship is like fading away, right? The pillow, like the vitality of the pillow is going, and so are they. And what are you going to have left? Or just these sort of like these wisps, these moments, these like parts and these pieces, right? They float in the wind, just like sound. And wasn't there an image of a feather at the end of the film as well? Or I feel like there was a callback.
David gave him they show a flashback.
Oh yeah, that's right.
David
Okay,
gives him a feather, and then when we get to the end of the movie, we
that's what
see
it is. Yeah,
that Lionel has still kept the feather, and it's like in a
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
display
I didn't catch that.
thing. Yeah.
yeah.
I thought you were thinking
Um,
of Forrest Gump. I was confused.
so I do think the feathers, because they float, and especially they're kind of like fleeting. They're hard to like, because the image specifically shows he's having a hard time holding them. Like, he physically can't hold them all. They're kind of like flying away, sort
Mm.
of. And I think that's like the how delicate and like slippery their relationship is, because it's like they can't they just want to hold on to it and they can't, right? But I think I didn't think of this until Greg was describing the putting the feathers back in the pillow. But at the end of the movie, a big moment is um while David is gone, Lionel mends the holes in David's socks. So I feel like there's some mirror
Yeah.
imagery there
Mm.
of like the filling of the holes. I mean, there's also like a more erotic reading I think you could do of that, but the like I was like, people are gonna be listening to this
What
and
do you
they'll be
mean,
like,
Jen?
it's so obvious. It's so obvious why you're not mentioning it. So I feel like I have to mention it. The but yeah, there's something about like these are the little tender ways in which they are showing the real, like that we see their relationship and the sign that they love each other, right? Because they don't say too much when David comes back and he's like, "Did you do this?" And he just goes, and then Lionel just says, "Yes." And then that's it. Like they don't talk about like,
Yeah.
"Oh, thank you for taking care of me," or there's a whole
Yeah.
other another version of this movie would have a whole monologue attached to that moment, right?
Yeah.
Or like a sweeping score or something, you know what I mean? Like, but it's a quiet, just a quiet, understated moment between the two of them. Yeah.
Since we're talking about feathers, I mean, there's the book itself, the entire book, The History of Sound. There is a lot of bird imagery and birds
Yes.
featuring pretty prominently an auk, a swan. So I think maybe we can move to the rhetorical situation and to like, since we've read this as a piece of literature, maybe talking about what we feel about it as an adaptation.
It's book club time, Greg.
Yeah.
All right. This is the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have a section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers in the teaching of writing. The rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. As we mentioned earlier, the history of and we've mentioned several times, the history of sound has a screenplay adapted by Ben Shattuck, the author of the original source material. He wrote the short stories that compose the book that we've all read. Can some of the complaints about the restraint and slow pacing be attributed to a literary writer dipping his toes into a new genre? And I will say that in the Little Gold Men interview with Ben Shattuck, he does kind of talk about how this was a big learning curve for him and felt so new as a process and as a method of storytelling.
I think it's a very effective adaptation. I think that if you like the short story, I think you'll like the film too. I think the movie is subtle, it moves gently. And while it's true that it doesn't, like there are sort of classic movie structure, like books like the Save the Cat and all the whatever, right? And sort of things that we sort of expect out of a film. And I think that a deviation from that isn't necessarily like a bad thing. So while the movie doesn't have like that sort of like wave of like epiphany, emotion, climax in the same way that like a lot of like romances do, there was this culmination of sort of ripples throughout the movie that I think it still took me where I needed to go. It took me somewhere special, and I appreciated the sort of deft hand that he took here. Right, like sometimes there was a literary adaptation of Empire Falls. The novel
Mm.
Empire Falls that was adapted into a miniseries, and I remember thinking like it was okay as a miniseries. I liked the book, but I remember thinking that it was a lot of voiceover, and I remember feeling like, "Oh, this is an author," because I think the author adapted it into the miniseries, who like is in love with his language and doesn't want to lose his language, and like fair enough. That's why we're seeing the miniseries. A lot of people, at least. Um, but I feel like that while there's a lot, basically everything that you love about the short story is preserved, but I feel like there's more that he adds to it. There's more visual imagery. There's certainly more done with sound and with music that I think enriches this experience for me and changes it slightly, but still stays really true to the heart and soul of what was made the short story so special.
I had I mean, so just since I get to revel in book club for a little bit. So I listened to this audiobook 2 summers ago. So my wife, again, one of the things she knows about my literature taste is I really like things with interesting structure, right? The classic example being Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, that kind of has all these levels to it, and you go all the way down and then you come all the way back out and so on. And so she knew this structure from her work, and she'd read that it was these kind of paired short stories, and she's like, this sounds up your alley. also, it's Jenny Slate's husband, and she has a ton of famous friends in her Rolodex, and she called them all to do the audiobook. And the audiobook is really, really special because it's kind of a full cast. And I think I brought this up. Oh, I wasn't on the episode. So I screamed it into my headphones when you guys were talking about Life of Chuck, because Nick Offerman shows up here like he did as the narrator in Life of Chuck. And Chris Cooper, who we haven't talked nearly enough about, but he read this story in the audiobook. Ed Helms does one, and on and on and on. It's like a lot of kind of the crowd you might expect associated there. So I was so interested then when I got to the end of the movie. I'd been disappointed to hear it was only the two stories, and then the credits come up, and it does say Ben Shattuck did the actual adaptation, and it really surprised me just because I hadn't heard that he was doing it, and so I hadn't thought about it. Now, my understanding, with no disrespect intended, is it's not like he's a novelist who's been working forever, right? I believe this is his second book, and it feels very much like the ambitious short story collection you write to get a novel deal, right? And I mean that's just the reality of how publishing works. And so I think that's the step he's on. His other book, I believe, is about he just went on walks in the woods that Henry David Thoreau walked, and like wrote about the experience. So it also fits with this adaptation. So I'm gonna say I thought, as like a first adaptation of a short story collection, like this really worked really well, and I was impressed with all the things Antonio just reminded us about, all the ways that he extended it. And as much as I'm excited for book club, my memory of this book is probably the fuzziest, but it felt like the choices he made in the adaptation to kind of expand the scope a little and to take us to some of these other places and into these other lives, they made sense and are good choices, and yet they are often like my least favorite parts of this film, right? And it's just the nature of the story that I'm going to remember this as two guys in a tent, and I'm going to remember this as Chris Cooper, crying at a piano, just like tearing my soul to shreds with the kind of beauty of loss and so on. So I think it's a very good adaptation in the ways adaptations are supposed to honor the source material, but rebuild it in its own way for its own medium. So I'm not about to blame him. What I recall of Living, this also very much fits with this director's work. So I do think it's equal parts to kind of create this atmosphere and everything you all have talked about, like the feathers and the Jen bringing up the tea bags. It's like, yeah, it's supposed to feel wispy and ethereal and small. It's not going to be the big flashy film based on this material. So I thought it was a great adaptation. It makes me really excited. I will, just because you guys have given me so much credit already, this is the book in my life I've recommended the most. And usually, I'm sure you both know this, you recommend a book and people are like, okay, and then you never hear again. And they either bought it or they didn't, and then they didn't, or if they did, they didn't care for it and they're just being polite. I have like 3 people at work, 3 extended family members, my mom, who reads more than she used to because she works in a library, so she gets to read what comes in and so on. But like everybody I've talked to, nobody's been disappointed by this book. And again, I would recommend, if you liked the film, try the audiobook, because it is really kind of high production value for an audiobook, or try the traditional book, because it's great the way the whole thing is constructed. Book club. Yay.
So I have so many thoughts in response to all of that. I'm going to ground myself by going back to Antonio's specific question about the restraint and the pacing. And I feel like it is a perfect marriage between Ben Shattuck's writing style and Oliver Jimenez's directorial style, because of, and I think it's just like, people just need, it's not their thing. If you don't like the pacing of this movie, that's fine. There are other movies that are faster and more furious, and that's fine. But so I don't think that's the issue. I think it's just the nature of the story. And the thing to me that was the most beautiful was that it is a film and a story that is comfortable sitting until the echo is played out. you hear that through the music, right? Because I think the sound work in this, in terms of like the recordings and the songs and all that stuff, like, is so beautiful, and it just like lets you sit with it in a way that is not, it doesn't immediately cut, there are no montages of people singing, right? It's just like it lets you sit with it. And I think that is perfect, considering it's talking about folk music, right? Because folk music really is about capturing these heartbreaking stories that last through time, right? That are very personal when they're written, but then become larger than life and almost like fables when they're passed down from person to person and generation to generation. And I feel like the film, to me, presented David and Lionel's story as another folk song, in a way that really was beautiful. So I I don't know. I think it is a really good adaptation. My notes about the middle of the movie aside, I think that was just kind of like, that's just the nature of the type of story that is. I will also say the cleverest adaptation move that they make here is, or that Ben Shattuck, I should credit, who's responsible for it, but the frame narrative, like, so turning the part where older Lionel is giving that TV interview and making that, but not overdoing it, because in the beginning it's just Chris Cooper's voice that we hear, and then by the time we get to his actual scenes at the end of the movie, it's so powerful because we've been hearing him off and on through the whole movie. I thought that was very clever. It was a good way of kind of making it so it really is about someone looking back on their life and this big like their life's biggest regret, right? Can we talk about that last scene and how well it works and why? So just to set it up, there's Chris Cooper. We see him do this interview. It's clear that he's become a really successful musicologist, like ethnographer, I think is the other. There's ethnomusicologist, I think is technically the term. And he's published a couple books. He's really famous. He's getting this sort of Charlie Rose PBS style interview, right? Where he's talking about his love of folk music, and he mentions David. He doesn't mention him by name, but he sort of says like, "Oh, this all started because a dear friend of mine got me into studying folk music, and we loved it." But then he discovers the package shows up on his door with all the wax cylinders, and there's a shot where we see it is all their old cylinders, which is great, but there's one that he hasn't listened to, that's from David, right? It's like a letter to him presumably before he committed suicide. So take it away. Why is the scene so powerful? Why is it kind of like cinch the movie all together in a beautiful way?
I'm stealing Antonio's line, which is like, as soon as you hear Chris Cooper, you're like, oh, it's Chris Cooper. Like, we're going to get Chris Cooper in this movie. And he would totally endorse book club, because I run into him at bookstore events here in the Boston area. He lives somewhere outside of town. I'm not entirely sure where, but especially if I go, he and I were at Colson Whitehead for Underground Railroad. Maybe the one after that. The one from last year with the first person camera. That one.
Nickel Boys.
Nickel Boys, yeah.
Boys. Yeah, we were at the Nickel Boys release party with Colson Whitehead together, so he would totally approve of this. And again, Ben Shattuck and Jenny Slate also live somewhere in Massachusetts. They run a general store on the South Shore, and then both just have the freedom to pursue their acting and writing and voiceover for shell work. So
amazing.
It's a very New England production. So I really loved this last scene, and this was I've already, I think, heard from both of you that you were shaking your fist at the critics at different times. Again, knowing how muted this had been, I took a spin through the Letterboxd reviews, and there were more than one, which probably means less than 10, but enough that I saw a trend that was like, and then it got to the maudlin third act, and I was like, no way, I hate this movie. And they really tore it apart. And I was astounded and shaking my fist, because I thought this was, as Jen said, kind of a moment that pulled it all together. And to me, it is, and this is what my Letterboxd review was based on. It goes back to when Lionel explains how the cylinders work to the small children as they're recording their mother, and then all of them singing together. And he talks about the needle making the impression in the wax of the peaks and the valleys of the sound wave and the vibrations, but then how you need a second needle, right? And this everything about History of Sound, the book, and this is all about the second needle to me, that it matters that the message is dead and it doesn't live. The songs are dead and they don't live until somebody picks up and puts the needle back on the recording, right? And fills that in. And I love this idea of this small reverberation kind of echoing out across time empty until he in this last moment gets to be cliche about it, to see the road not taken, that there was a chance and there was something real there. And having seen him like show up in the Scottish, or not, it's not Scotland, but like the Lakes District, be like, I'm just looking for something, like some husk of a life, and then realize he got back on track and had the good life that he wanted to, and yet it was all real. Just, it's not like that part of him was lost. That part of him was real, and it meant something, and it meant something to David. The actual message from David is actually also very subtly played in a way I loved. Like, it wasn't like I would have run away with you or any like something that I would call maudlin. It was
In fact,
small
he
and
actually
restrained.
says, "I don't know what else to say." Like it's like
Yeah.
he can't find the words, but then he has the song. And the song, to me, The Silver Dagger, because it's a callback to when we've heard it in the film before, that is what broke me. That's what made me start crying in the theater. I was just like, "Oh, like
Yeah.
he's singing the song back to him. Like this is how they spoke to each other, was through this thing." And we get that from the opening scene when they're at the piano, right? They just, all they did all night, maybe they didn't talk that much, but all they did were trade these songs back and forth, right? They were the two needles.
There's a scene right before we get to this last scene that Greg just alluded to, where he's like in the lakes and he's searching for something, and he ends up at this old couple's house, and they're like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing in the middle of nowhere?" Right? Um, and he says, like, someone special, told me about this. He told me that he thought I would like it. And like that is sort of Lionel at his most, sort of like at his lowest, at this high point of his life, but his sort of like lowest in revealing just how much he's chasing after something that he can never recapture, right? That's how far you're willing to go to try to find this again. And so it is a nice moment that when he gets the cylinder. I will say that the I had forgotten. I thought that the moment when David is talking to him in the on the recording, I thought that was an invention of the screenplay. I thought, like, oh, they need his voice again, Josh O'Connor's voice again, to be back here. And I for somehow I had just forgotten, because I went back to the story and it's there. Like, I don't think it's the exact lines from the film, but it's something to that effect. Um, and there was a moment in that moment where I thought, like, I don't need this. Like, I don't need him to talk to Lionel directly. I thought that, like, even just like a moment of just them pre-record, like before someone's singing and the two of them sort of talking, or just the song itself would have been enough for me. I think that maybe that um I could see some critics saying, like, this moment doesn't quite work, but I don't know, for some reason it didn't register to me as like an overly maudlin moment when I initially read it, and to the point where I had even sort of forgotten, like, but but I love the symmetry of it. It makes perfect sense in the context of, like, the way that these stories operate and how they complete one another, the themes of the work. It's just so thoughtfully crafted, that I don't know. For me, I guess that this is just like why I was so stunned as to, like, how the critical reception could be this sort of like chilly toward it. I just don't get it. So I'm really happy to talk to two people uh, who are closer to me in their reception of this, because I'm not normally this sort of like, what is going on here when I read reviews. But Jen, what
Yeah,
about
and
you?
it might just be that all of those people didn't read the book. And so
Maybe.
they're not coming, they're coming at the movie with a preconceived notion of what it is going to be. And then they're too busy working out the friction between what they thought it was going to be and what it actually is, versus we,
Yeah.
having read the book, are going into it knowing full well sort of what kind of story it is and what we're going to expect, more or less, right? With some changes. Can I file a complaint? This is my last critical thing. There's my favorite scene from the book is not in the movie. And I kept waiting for it the whole time. So the scene from the story, this is during their song collecting trip over the summer. There's a house that they get to where the man who lives there, he's like chopping wood or something like that, and he says, like, he gets very angry at them when they ask, "Oh, your cousin said that you might have a song for us." And he said, "Can you come? Like, this is not a good time." He's like very gruff with them, and David sort of tries to turn on his charm, to try to like talk him into it. And then and they ask for water or something like that, which is like a weird reference to, in my brain, to weapons. And I'm like, don't take the water. uh, but the door opens when he goes to get the water, and his wife, who has just died, is laid out on the table, and like he's having a hard time grieving her, right? Like, because she's recently died, and you get the sense, because no one else is around, that it's like the funeral has probably long passed, but he still can't quite let go of her. And then they sing I think it's a song that Lionel sings, where the lyrics are all about, like, and then there's a change in the it's such a beautiful scene, and it taps into the themes of death, and sort of like, and love, and like when you love someone and then they die, like how, like, and also, and it's like an allegory for David and Lionel's relationship, because it's like one is like the death of the other, kind of, or something like that, right? Like, it's in the book, it all makes sense. I kept waiting for the scene because to me it was such a big deal in the story, and then it just never came. And I was like, the movie ended, and I was like, but what about that scene? So I don't know if you have thoughts about why they left that out. What is kind of serving that scene's purpose in the movie as it exists? Like, made me feel better about this choice.
I think that the time that they're together, functions as like the high point of their lives, like the height of their happiness, and that's a pretty heavy scene, which obviously like has its echoes in like the themes and echoes in the conclusion and how their love story ultimately ends. Um, my guess is that there probably was a version of it in the original screenplay, and maybe they even filmed. Maybe they even filmed it, but that in stitching it together, there was something that you want that scene to feel as sort of like lively and visceral as possible until the moment in which David sort of turns and gets upset, and then it sort of ends abruptly, is the way like that everything sort of ends abruptly in this story. So maybe there was just something off in the rhythm, or they felt like that it anchored that section that needed to really fly, for that, and that was a choice. I'm not sure. Greg, what do you think?
Mhm.
Well, the only other explanation I could have is it might have doubled up too much with the island, and because there is an
Mm.
older man there who talks about how his wife is buried on that land, and how
Oh, yeah.
they're kicking him off the land, and he has to leave his wife and maybe kids behind there.
Right, his
So
entire family is buried on the island, I think is what he says.
yeah, and so again, I do think you said Shattuck called them air and metal, but it's almost like air and like roots have something to do with a
Right.
lot of this too.
He might
Like
have said
who's
Earth. I could
rooted
be
and who's not.
misremembering.
Well, but it does feel like there's a question there again, which comes to me in the form of the wax cylinder, which is a permanent way to capture the impermanent, but it's a highly specialized way. So I think I would sum it up that the film is again trying to make us think constantly about like making the impermanent permanent in some way, and that's the goal of the songs. And folk songs, as you alluded to, are this beautiful path away from that. And so like whatever that scene could bring up about life and death, I think is kind of covered already, would be my guess. So
Yeah, because I think the song that David writes, which I don't believe is in the book, The one where it's basically like his subliminal message to Lionel, where he was like, the lover is sitting on the grave, and it's like the person in the grave is saying, don't sit here, move on with your life, right? Like that to me is a much more explicit way of engaging with the theme. So like, yeah, if I had to guess, they sort of did that instead to make, in general, and I think this was a wise, smart choice in adaptation, a lot of what we see in the film that's different from the book is making things in the book more explicit and kind of more obvious, which I think makes sense for the change in medium.
The only other thing I'll say, because you're both in my world this time, you're in my world now. I do think that this is something I love about a good adaptation is I want the two experiences to be unique. And I want to have a benefit to living in one or living in the other. And even like you're saying, that is one of the big dramatic scenes in the story. And to let that live in the story, right? And let that be the experience you get to have there, and then here you get a different version of it. That's my favorite part of adaptation. I don't like when it's like just cut and paste straight over.
I do think there are a couple key scenes that really takes advantage of the cinematic form, like the one where Lionel is after his father has died and he's dancing around the fire. And that is great. And then to me, the visual callback when he's in Rome and he's in the fountain, just the shot of the water looks so much like the water that David spits into Lionel's mouth in their first meet cute scene that I was just like, this is brilliant. This is so visual. This is great. Like, so, but my only, you know, if I were to ask for more and be greedy, I would say I would have loved more scenes that kind of like those, where it was like, especially the scenes that seem to tap into Lionel's, and I'm not going to remember the word now, but like his ability to feel and taste music in addition to hear it. There's a special term, which I'm not going to remember now, but I thought that there was a little bit of a missed opportunity that the film, it would have been a very different film tonally, I think, if it leaned more into that, if it kind of became a little bit more wild in its visual storytelling to try to be more sensory kind of, but that was the thing where I was like, oh, like that would have been cool if they tried to find ways to represent that on screen a little bit more. Because the book doesn't really do that either. Like it mentions this thing about him, but then that's kind of it in terms of like the description doesn't explicitly reference, okay, he's not just hearing this song, he's doing these other things are happening to him. It's not really leaning into that experience as much.
I do think that the scenes that you mentioned, like particularly the grieving scene by the fire, like, you know, you risk it when in voiceover someone is describing like experiencing the world in a unique way. Then like, okay, well, how am I going to see that? And then when you see it, you're like, oh my god, right? Like that's how it manifests. Like that makes absolute sense. It's something that is like unusual, and like all credit also to like Paul Mescal for inhabiting that in a way that to make that very unusual feeling seem like legible to like a movie audience. I thought that was pretty great. And also the moments you mentioned, also like when he like is on the floor of the by the piano. I mean, like I also viewed that as an echo of just like being with David, like in the tent.
Right.
But
He's more comfortable sleeping on a floor than in a comfortable feather bed or whatever.
yeah, but I could imagine him hearing also like experience like through memory, not just like the physical experience of it, but hearing what it was like to have like David beside him, and hearing David's voice too.
All right. Will the Academy hear David's voice? Is the question. That's my lame attempt at a segue. We're going to do a quick Oscars watch to close us out. Okay, so as we have constantly reminded listeners of throughout this whole episode, the critics are not big fans of this movie.
Let me jump in on that, because you at some point alluded to not knowing how the box office was doing. So I Googled it while you were doing. So it opened a week before we're talking about it, and got about 500,000 from just 4 theaters. And then it jumped up to 550 theaters this weekend when we were all able to see it. And actually, according to Deadline, did pretty decent with about 320,000 from that number of theaters. I mean, PT is usually the expert on knowing exactly how that breaks down, but that's pretty solid. And then the Deadline article notes it's 83% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, which, given everything we've talked about, that's actually doing a little better than I would have expected. Though, again, I think that's a little weaker than we would have thought. So I think part of what's tainting us is it did get dumped in this September spot where we have a lot of award season rejects. And the other movie I saw this weekend was Big Bold Beautiful Journey, and I will tell you that that is a big bold piece of fun time at the movies. So I think like both of those movies are part of this narrative. Like, oh, it didn't look good enough to the studios. The studios didn't believe in it, so they dumped it into September. I'm putting Mubi on notice though, because I think if they made a real push and got behind this movie, I releasing a Spotify soundtrack is super easy these days, right? Like, I think they could be making more. So I'm gonna say I'm doubtful it will get any at this point. That's not about what it deserves, just about the narrative that's out there and its kind of quietish release. The one I'm pulling for is adapted screenplay, if I get to pick one. Antonio,
That
where are
would
you
be
at?
really good.
I would love adapted screenplay. I would love, I mean, sound, score, um, actor, supporting actor, maybe too. I mean, like this is like a pretty August like wish list, but and a little bit of a reach. But I do think that there have been movies in the past that haven't resonated as much with critics, but audiences love them, right? But audiences end up finding them, appreciating them. Actors, it often starts with like actors really like championing something. Um, so I think that if that happens, then there could be some momentum. But I agree with Greg that its best chance and the one that I'm rooting for at the most is adapted screenplay because I do think it's a pretty incredible adaptation.
Right. So Paul Mescal is likely going to get a Best Actor or well,
Right.
what category
True.
he would be in is questionable. It sounds like based on the book, he would be more supporting actor, but it sounds like his role is amped up in the movie, so he could potentially be actor opposite Jessie Buckley. So this could be a situation where he gets nominated for Hamnet, but this movie kind of boosts his profile a little bit in terms of like makes him a stronger contender in the race if people notice his performance in this as well. But
A
yeah, I
real
would
Sebastian Stan situation.
Yes.
Got it.
Exactly. That worked out somewhat well for him. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I think adapted screenplay. Do we know how competitive it is? I feel like I've seen a couple of lists flying around of people saying there could, because like one battle after another is based on Vineland, right? And then so like there are a lot of adapted contenders out there. I do think that are pretty strong right now. Hamnet, right, being the other one I just mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's a harder road to get to win, but I think there's room in the category
for nomination. Yeah. The one I personally would be thrilled about is can we start a supporting actor campaign for Chris Cooper, like in the Judi Dench style, because he's not only in the movie for like 8 minutes. But so yeah, it's hard to say now. I'd say stock is down for this movie now just because people just aren't talking about it. Apparently it made the rounds at TIFF, and I think Chris Rosen said something like, I didn't talk to a single person who'd watched this movie. So it could be that the campaign, any kind of campaign, is DOA. I think maybe Mubi bit off more than it could chew, acquiring titles, and has no budget to actually campaign a movie like this. But yeah, I would love to see it get something.
The strength they do have is they have a streaming service that awards crowds watch. And if they, I think that greatly helped the substance that it was widely available to anybody who wanted to check it out. I want to play PT because he's not here. Chris Cooper does have an Oscar. Do you know what it's for?
Adaptation.
Yes, you got it.
Well done.
When I saw it was a Best Supporting Actor, my mind went right to October Sky. That was my guess, and then it was adaptation.
Okay. That would be a good guess, yeah. So, yeah,
not
we'll
the Muppet
see.
movie, which is also a beloved Chris Cooper part.
He's great in
raps.
That's right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I'd like, but that's why we have the letters. This is not the last
Big
time
letter
you've heard
potential on
yeah,
this one.
not the last time you've heard us talk about this movie. Sorry, listeners. So, all right. This is great. I'm so glad we made time to talk about this. And it's one of those like texts, both the book and the movie, that's so rich that I feel like we could talk about this even longer. But hopefully, we've given listeners enough to go on that they're excited about it as we are. Antonio, I'm so glad you put this together. Thank you for making a fantastic outline. Where can folks find you? And I think there's only one place.
You can find me on Letterboxd at Elefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can folks find you?
People can find me primarily on Letterboxd at Ioncanon, EYEONCANON. Let me just put in one last plug for the smart gentleman who picked this for his hype draft. So I'm feeling pretty good coming off this one. And I just want to welcome my co-host and everybody else to Josh O'Connor Autumn. Don't forget, we will be seeing him in Greg's hype draft pick, The Mastermind, directed by Kelly Reichardt. Getting very good buzz. That's in October. And in November, he will be in the splashy Ryan Johnson, Benoit Blanc mystery, Wake Up Dead Man, which that trailer got a lot of excitement too. So, yes. And I think I already made this joke on this podcast, but I will say I also watched at least half of Masters of the Air, thinking that also starred Josh O'Connor, but that's a man named Callum Turner, who is an entirely different British man. And I just didn't know they were different people. So Callum Turner coming out in A24's Eternity with Elizabeth Olsen. So I don't have to be mad I didn't grab that Josh O'Connor movie. Jen, take us home.
So many jokes I could tell right now, but I'm not going to because I have class, unlike Greg. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sopchockchai, Sopchockchai. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. My last desperate plug, will be for joining. You have 2 days. I'm going to try to get this episode out tomorrow, which will be the September 24th, which means there'll be 1 or 2 days left. It's the 25th, I think, is the cutoff for the Vulture Movies Fantasy League. You can join our mini league. There's a whole episode. I'm not going to repeat the instructions or anything. There's a whole episode just about joining this league and playing this game that Vulture does with us. So if it all perks your ears up, you can go over to that episode and check that out.
I want to confirm we have 4 hosts participating, and we've gotten 3 of the 4 partners of hosts into the game as well. So pressure's on to get your partner on, Jen.
Yeah, I have not broached that subject yet. I convinced him to come with me to one battle after another. So I'm gonna enjoy that win for a little bit, and then I will tomorrow ask.
And then you've got one battle after that one, so you're good.
Yep, one battle after another, one battle at a time. So yeah, that's gonna be probably our next episode. So look forward to that.
Yeah.
PTA fans, but not PT, who's not here.
And PT's hype draft. We're jumping hype draft to hype draft.
I'm definitely losing our hype draft. It's not good.